is fixing to fall. But speaking just for me and some people from Tennessee, we got a thing or two to tell you all. This lady may have stumbled, but she ain't never failed. And if the Russians don't believe that, they can all go straight to hell. We're gonna put her feet back on the paths of righteousness, and then God bless America again. And you never did think that it ever would happen again. In America, did you? You never did think that we'd ever get together again. We're damn sure food you. We're walking real proud and we're talking real loud again. In America, you never did think that it ever would happen again. From the sound up in Long Island out to San Francisco Bay, and everything is in between them is our home. And we may have done a little bit of fighting amongst ourselves, but you outside people best leave us alone. Cause we'll all stick together, and you can take that to the bank. That's the cowboys and the hippies and the rebels and the Yanks. You just go and lay your hand on the Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I think you're gonna finally understand. And you never did think that it ever would happen again. In America, did you? You never did think that we'd ever get together again. We're damn sure fooled you. We're walking real proud and we're talking real loud again. In America, you never did think that it ever would happen again. And you never did think that it ever would happen again. In America, did you? You never did think that we'd ever get together again. Well, we damn sure fooled you. We're walking real proud and we're talking real loud again. In America, you never did think that it ever would happen again.
But in the moonlight, you just shine like a beacon on the bay. And I can't explain, but there's something about the way you look tonight years, and I don't know where to start. And I can't explain, but it's something about the way you look tonight takes my breath away. It's that feeling I get about you deep inside, and I can't describe, but there's something about the way you look tonight takes my breath away. The way you look tonight. And I can't explain, but it's something about the way you look tonight. Oh, it takes my breath away. It's that feeling I get about you deep inside, and I can't describe, but it's something about the way you look tonight takes my breath away. The way you look tonight. 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 The way you look tonight.
The devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind and he was willing to make a deal. When he came across this young man sewing on a fiddle and playing it hot, and the devil jumped up on a hickory stump and said, "Boy, let me tell you what. I guess you didn't know it, but I'm a fiddle player too. And if you'd care to take a dare, I'll make a bet with you. Now you play pretty good fiddle, boy, but give the devil his due. I bet a fiddle of gold against your soul, cause I think I'm better than you." The boy said, "My name's Johnny, and it might be a sin, but I'll take your bet and you're gonna regret, cause I'm the best as ever been." Johnny, rosin up your bow and play your fiddle hard, cause hell's broke loose in Georgia and the devil deals the cards. And if you win, you get this shiny fiddle made of gold, but if you lose, the devil gets your soul. The devil opened up his case and he said, "I'll start this show," and fire flew from his fingertips as he rosined up his bow. And he pulled the bow across the strings and it made an evil hiss. And then a band of demons joined in and it sounded something like this.
We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out. can't you see what you're doing to me? When you don't believe a word I say, we can't go on together with suspicious minds, and we can build our dreams on suspicious minds. So if an old friend I know stops by to say hello, would I still see suspicion in your eyes? But here we go again, asking where I've been. You can't see the tears are real, I'm crying. We can't go on together with suspicious minds, and we can build our dreams on suspicious minds. Won't let our love survive, or dry the tears from your eyes. Let's don't let a good thing die. Well, honey, you know I've never lied to you. Yeah, yeah. We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Why can't you see what you're doing to me? When you don't believe a word I say, don't you know I'm caught in a trap? I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Don't you know I'm caught in a trap? I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Don't you know I'm caught in a trap? I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Don't you know I'm caught in a trap? I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Don't you know I'm caught in a trap? I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Don't you know I'm caught in a trap? I can't walk out. Past the point of no return, no backward glances. The games we've played till now are at an end. Past all thought of if or when, no use resisting. Abandon thought and let the dream descend. What raging fire shall flood the soul
Come with me. I know where they are.
But can I trust you?
You must. But remember, your hands at the level of your eyes.
But why?
Why? Put your authority first. I'll come with you. No, you stay here. Come with me, monsieur. Hurry, or we shall be too late.
It's been 7 hours and 15 days since you took your love away. I go out every night and sleep all day since you took your love away. Since you've been gone, I can do whatever I want. I can see whomever I choose. I can eat my dinner in a fancy restaurant, but nothing, I said nothing can take away this blues. 'Cause nothing compares to you. It's been so lonely without you here.
The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair during the closing days of the presidential campaign.
The District Attorney of New York was investigating me for something that is not a crime, not a misdemeanor, not an affair.
We have just gotten word former President Donald Trump has been indicted by a grand jury in New York.
First time in American history that a former president of the United States has been formally indicted in a criminal investigation.
Former President Donald Trump will speak tonight in the aftermath of his unprecedented court appearance today. We are looking live at a ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Florida club, where he's scheduled to speak in about 15 minutes. Trump was arraigned this afternoon on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payments made during his 2016 campaign. Welcome to this special report from the newsroom of The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. This is the first time in U.S. history that a former president has been indicted for a crime. This all comes as Trump runs for president in 2024 and faces other criminal investigations. I'm joined tonight by opinions columnist James Hohman and senior congressional correspondent Rhonda Colvin. Rhonda, we are watching tonight for Donald Trump to speak because this is his first public moment to respond to what happened today.
Yes, his first public moment after the arraignment, after we now have had this indictment unsealed and we know the counts against him. It's also the first time we're going to hear him at length since all of this occurred. We've seen that he did do a post on Truth Social right after the news of the indictment broke last Thursday, calling this a witch hunt, kind of weaving in his campaign for 2024 into that statement as well, not talking much about his innocence or what he believes he's innocent in this matter. So I'll be listening out for, is he going to make this more of a campaign speech? Is he going to, because there's a lot of supporters there from the visuals we have inside right now. It looks like it could be a campaign style speech, but it's certainly something we're all interested to see because it's the first time we're really going to hear him respond to what happened today.
James, set the stage for us tonight and, just give us some historical context. We use the word unprecedented. We've used the word historic. How significant is this moment right now?
It is unprecedented, and that's not a word we use lightly. It is also going to set the tone for the rest of the presidential campaign. This is Donald Trump laying the groundwork for a trial that may not happen until next year, may not happen until after the Republican primaries. Will he be able to convince Republicans to stick with him? There's been a rally around the flag, short-term effect, but there's this indictment that's out there, 34 felony charges. It's going to cloud over him, and so how he sort of lays the groundwork to respond. We think we know, we think we understand Trump. He's a counterpuncher, but this is going to really set the tone for the rest of the campaign.
Talk to us about the timeline, Rhonda, because this is the beginning of this process today. You talked about the arraignment, but we're not expecting great movement on this anytime soon.
Or not. It's been reported that this may go on into another year, so we may not see Trump in a courtroom setting for a while. But that's not to say that his team isn't trying to figure out how to campaign simultaneously while also preparing for a trial. So this is something, again, that we've been saying all day today is uncharted territory, and it just remains to be seen how this is all going to play out.
Reporter Reshma Kirpalani is outside Mar-a-Lago for us tonight, and she's been speaking to people congregating in front of the former president's Palm Beach residence. Let's listen.
It's absolutely a witch hunt. Everything that they do is after Trump. And it's not fair. It's really not fair. He ran a successful country for 4 years under all this pressure. Two fake impeachments, all these, the Russia. No matter what you do to him, we're not going away. You've got 74 million people who are going to vote for nobody but Trump. after this, you probably got a whole lot more.
A Trump supporter there on the ground. That's tape gathered by Reshma, who joins us now. What is it like outside Mar-a-Lago tonight, Reshma?
So the atmosphere outside of Mar-a-Lago is consistent with what it's been for the past 2 weeks since I've been out here reporting, which is celebratory. About 100 Trump supporters stood on the bridge right in front of Mar-a-Lago, and they were waiting very excitedly for the former president's motorcade to drive by. And certainly when it did so, there were lots of cheers and flag waving and sign waving. So his supporters tell me that, certainly they're here for him. They want him to know that, and they want to celebrate. They want to celebrate the former president.
Have any anti-Trump protesters come out?
There was one anti-Trump protester. There was a sign that he was holding that said, lock him up. And there was a little bit of back and forth between the supporters and the protester. But by and large, it was overwhelmingly supporters out here tonight.
Reshma, what will you be watching for now in the coming hours as we see Donald Trump speak? From his supporters, are they all tuning in? Are they going to be watching on their phones? How tuned in are they to his words?
So what I will tell you is that right after the motorcade drove by, people basically immediately left, and they were all telling me that they were leaving to go watch and listen to and, very much, see what the former president has to say. There was one woman who had actually set up a speaker system on the bridge so that people could hear what he had to say right on the bridge outside of Mar-a-Lago. So there's definitely, very high interest amongst his supporters as to what he is going to say tonight.
Reshma Kirpalani, thank you so much for joining us. So, James, let's talk about what is in the substance here of the indictment, which was unsealed today.
So we knew ahead of time that it was going to pertain to adult film actress Stormy Daniels and the $130,000 in hush money that was paid to her before the 2016 election. There's Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy. And the $130,000 was paid by Michael Cohen, who was then Trump's lawyer. Trump then reimbursed Michael Cohen. Allegedly, this was over an extramarital affair that Trump was trying to keep secret related to the election. But the indictment also includes details about a $30,000 payment to a doorman at Trump Tower who alleged to have information about a love child that Trump had. The National Enquirer did something called catch and kill with that story, concluded it wasn't true. The indictment ultimately leans heavily on National Enquirer and that company doing this catch and kill scheme, in the word of the indictment. And allegedly, Trump thanked David Pecker, then the head of National Enquirer, after the election for his help in covering up multiple scandals.
Shana Jacobs is the Washington Post's New York courts reporter, and she was in the courtroom today as former President Trump pleaded not guilty. Shana, you were our eyes and ears in there. Photographers only had a few minutes in there to get some shots before everything really got started. What was it like inside the courtroom?
Well, it was really quite a moment. I mean, unfortunately, almost every reporter, based on where we were sitting in the gallery, had a really bad view of the former president. We really could only see the back of his head, but even the back of his head and his back was blocked by lines of court officers and Secret Service and other security in the room. So it's really kind of a difficult situation to get the best read on things. But it was, really, it was just such once he walked into the courtroom, it sort of struck most of us that this was history happening in front of our eyes. Even though a lot of chaos went into getting organized to get into the courtroom, and reporters had to line up. Were lined up from 24 hours before the arraignment even happened to get a ticket to get into the courtroom. So there was a lot of stress and a lot of chaos that went into even just being able to be there. And once it happened, it was really an incredible thing to see, just in terms of the importance of it.
Shana, what was the sound like in the courtroom? Was it as quiet or as loud as a normal courtroom is? Was there a different sense of atmosphere or tension in the room because of what was at stake today?
I think there was kind of like a feeling of anxiety and tension, but more just because, like I said, there was so much stress that went into getting screened, making sure you had a spot, getting to a particular place in line, and for reporters, it was a bit of chaos even to get to that point. I mean, people went into the courtroom sleepless because they were waiting in line overnight to be handed a ticket to enter this morning at 8 o'clock. The law enforcement, rightfully has a very important job in that position, which is to protect him and protect the people in the courtroom, protect the judge, protect the prosecutors from anything that could happen. So, I mean, there was just a sense of heightened alert on their part. The tension was not necessarily the result of anything except the moment that we were in, for them and the obligations they had and for our obligations.
Shayna, there is a vivid detail in our main story about what unfolded today. You and your colleagues write that Donald Trump glared for several seconds at the District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who was sitting in the courtroom's front row when the hearing ended. Tell us more about that.
That was one of the few things that we could get a little bit of a glimpse at because Trump had to stand up, literally just to stand up to walk out of the courtroom when it was over. So he stood up and he turned around and he kind of took in the room for a second or two, and then his eyes landed on Bragg. And we couldn't quite see if Bragg was looking at him. I don't think he was, but his eyes locked on Bragg, and he really shot him a look, a pretty unpleasant look on my read. And he stared at him for a few beats, and then looked around a little bit. And a few moments later, he was ushered out. So it wasn't much of a thing other than the moment, the few seconds that we were able to witness.
Shayna Jacobs, she was there in the courtroom today as Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to these 34 counts. Thank you so much, Shayna, for talking with us. James, take us through the public reaction to this situation, this unprecedented situation we find ourselves in.
Libby, we're starting to get some polling data that's coming in about the indictment. CNN did a national poll, found that about 60% of Americans, a meaningful majority, support or approve of the decision to indict Trump. However, 76%, 3/4 of Americans believe that it was a political decision or that politics at least played a minor role. Only 14% think that politics played no role at all here. Independents match about the country. 62% approve of the indictment. But interestingly, when you ask the question, was what Trump did with Stormy Daniels illegal, unethical, but not illegal, or not wrong at all, only 10% say that what Trump did wasn't wrong at all. On the other hand, when given the options, only 37% think he actually broke the law. Now, ultimately, it's the law that will matter in the court and before a jury, but the politics and the political track here are important. If Donald Trump can dismiss this as political and make it look like a political attack, it may make it easier for him to basically move past this and focus on his campaign.
Thanks so much, James. Rhonda, we heard from the District Attorney Alvin Bragg today. He addressed the media after the indictment was unsealed. What did we learn from him?
Well, one of the things he said and took a lot of time trying to underline is that this is a typical case for his office. White-collar crime, he called their bread and butter. So he said as a financial district and the financial capital of the world, they take this stuff seriously. So he was sort of appealing to any questions that have been surfacing about why this case, are there merits to it? He really broke that down, that this is a very standard case that they will not pass on, no matter who it is. So he did spend time discussing that. He talked about how the hush money payments and the entire scheme ran about 9 months. And it was something that when you read the introduction to the indictment, they go over word by word, sentence by sentence, trying to paint the picture that Donald Trump was incredibly aware of what was going on. He invited the National Enquirer CEO to a meal at the White House to thank him for his help in some of these so-called catch and kill situations. So the DA's office seems to be ready, or at least putting that out there to the public. And again, we'll just all wait and see how this develops.
Let's bring in Ashley Parker, senior national political correspondent. Ashley, I just want to get your sense, because you've covered Trump for so many years. Did you learn anything really fundamentally new through this indictment today?
Fundamentally new about him, no. And I will say I actually think, and this is some of the coverage I've been doing before the indictment, was that that's why these sort of attacks on his character, whether they're from Democrats, from Republicans, from Never Trumpers, they're not effective because at this point people believe they know who Donald Trump is, right? And they love him, they hate him, they think he is morally reprehensible, they think he's their savior. But there's nothing new that feels like it can come out, including in this indictment, that will fundamentally change how people view the president. So in reading this, as someone who's followed him as a politician since 2015, nothing really surprised me at all.
Ashley, let's talk about Donald Trump's body language today and what you were able to see as someone who has watched him so closely over the years.
So I will say that was surprising to me because, in talking to people on his team, he was not happy to be indicted, but they described him as sort of resigned, calm. Someone, said rather stoic. Actually, this was sort of in the immediate aftermath of the grand jury vote. But his team in recent days had sort of been publicly and privately touting, how big the fundraising numbers were off of this indictment and how many new volunteers they signed up and how good this was for him politically and what the polls showed. And that, again, I was not in the courtroom. I sort of got the glimpses that everyone else got of a few photos, a few seconds of video footage. But I've been around Donald Trump long enough and interviewed him and been in off the records with him and on the record gaggles that you sort of know from his body language almost instantly. Is this a moment he's, coming to banter with the press? Is he angry? Does he have something on his mind? And that was a very unhappy, deeply angry Donald Trump, at least from those images we saw, which does go counter to the portrait that his entire team has been working feverishly to put out into the world over these past 72 or so hours.
Donald Trump is someone who likes to control the narrative, Ashley, and control his situation. When you are in a courtroom, it is the judge who is completely in charge. Now we go to Mar-a-Lago, where Trump takes center stage and really is back in the spotlight in the way that he wants to put himself. Can you give a sense of that contrast and what those two venues mean for him today?
See what this speech is that he delivers. Often for something like this, it's fairly scripted. There's a teleprompter his team wants him to stick to. He's often good at it, again, in these kind of specific moments, but not always. And Mar-a-Lago is interesting because the events there, they are his home turf. They're very comfortable. He's done some election nights there, some big announcements there, but they're also not the raucous crowds of rallies, right? They're certainly Trump supporters. They're, dues-paying members of his club. It's not cheap to join. There are people he's invited. There's members of the media. But Mar-a-Lago always has a slightly different feel than, a huge roaring crowd in an arena on a Friday night. So it'll be interesting to see if he sticks to the teleprompter or not and how much he can feed off the energy of a crowd, which typically is not as energetic as a rally crowd, but is certainly very friendly and loyal.
And Ashley, finally, as you talk about the teleprompter and just how much Donald Trump may stay on a scripted message versus develop his own message on the spot, how much is on the line in this moment? Because he's not just running for office, he's also in legal jeopardy. And he has to be aware of how what he says could be used in legal proceedings or if the judge takes issue with how far he goes in his comments.
Absolutely. A lot is on the line. And again, those are moments when, not always, but he's often, when speaking, somewhat more likely to stay on the prompter. But, the judge did not impose a gag order, but even heading into this, it was very clear that even people on his own team believed that sort of some of the more problematic statements he was making about the judge, that he was making about the district attorney, referring to Alvin Bragg and
sometimes racist language, putting out an article that had a photo that seemed to juxtapose Trump holding a baseball bat with a photo of the Manhattan DA, that these were mistakes and these were problematic things that would not help his cause. And that's always been the challenge with Trump. Going back to the impeachment and the Mueller investigation, it's not just what he's been alleged to have done, it's then how he has sort of publicly handled the situation and more often than not made it worse for himself.
Ashley Parker, thank you so much for joining us. I want to point out, James, that Alvin Bragg is the first black Manhattan DA in the office's history. What will you be watching tonight for Donald Trump and how he speaks about the case, the judge, the DA, prosecutors?
Tone matters. I mean, the big concern, and this wouldn't normally be the concern, but these are unprecedented times, is does he incite violence? Does he encourage his supporters to protest, or does he urge calm and rise above?
I want to note that there's Eric Trump. We've also seen some other family members come in. Looks like Jason Miller is there, part of the campaign team. We saw Tiffany Trump. We saw Donald Trump Jr. earlier there to support their father. The family optics are important, Rhonda.
In this case, yes, they are, because it shows support. It shows that, perhaps they believe he is innocent in all of this, that they want him to run again and be successful in 24. Who we have not seen yet today is his wife, Melania Trump. She did not accompany him to New York. And there have been a lot of questions about how is she handling this? Will she be there tonight? But you're right, we have seen Tiffany Trump as well and her husband. We've also seen 2 members of Congress so far, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene. That was expected. They said that they would be there for this. And of course, we have been reporting that this would start at 8:15, so it's a few minutes later than that, but it does look like they are kind of getting there soon.
Yep, he's coming out. He's right there behind the flag. So we're going to head to the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago to listen to Donald Trump's comments. We're interested in this from a news perspective because this is the first time he'll be talking to people publicly, talking to the cameras since his indictment today. These 34 felony counts, the first time a former United States president has been indicted on crimes. And so, James, this has a lot of news value. We'll be talking about and analyzing what Trump says. We'll be listening for how he handles this moment, James.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is his chance to respond to very serious allegations of criminal wrongdoing, 34 felonies, the first time in U.S. history that a former president has been indicted for a crime. And here he gets to tell his side of the story on his own terms with the home field advantage of Mar-a-Lago.
This is live coverage from the Washington Post. Stay with us this evening as we fact check and listen to Donald Trump's speech and bring some analysis here as he talks. So far today, we've seen him going into a courtroom, photographed in that courtroom, surrounded by his phalanx of lawyers, attorneys who are now working on trying to defend him on 34 felony counts. We don't expect this to move quickly. We're looking at a timeline of January, perhaps even later, based on what the prosecution and the defense were talking about today in front of the judge. And so even though we've hit this really historic milestone today, this could drag on for months and months. And we still don't know, Rhonda, if there will be other indictments in other probes that Trump is undergoing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're also waiting for more information from the Fulton County, Georgia investigation, looking into did he intervene by pressuring officials down in Georgia during the 2020 election and trying to get more votes there. We all remember that phone call. There's also the classified documents probe that's being handled here in D.C. by a grand jury as well. That's all culminating all at the same time as this. So you almost have to wonder, logistically, how is this all going to play out with these major cases and the one that's already off to a start today, while he is also trying to campaign, at least in the primary or beyond.
And James, there was the question of just which of these investigations might come to fruition and reach this important sort of going over the mountain pass here. It's this one, right? We're looking at this one in Manhattan. But there are, one could argue, really dire charges that the president could face, the former president could face, if the investigations continue to gain steam.
And if you talk to Trump's own advisors, they feel that those are actually more legally and potentially politically problematic than this case. They see this as the weakest of them. And now perhaps we've reached a tipping point, and this will embolden the Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis or the Special Counsel Jack Smith to move forward.
A campaign speech in a moment unlike any other in American history. And this is an issue that's now forcing the other members of the Republican Party, other people who plan to run for president or are thinking about it, to defend Trump, really, in this legal situation. Let's go now live to Mar-a-Lago and Donald Trump's speech.
God bless you all. God bless you all. And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. I never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. From the beginning, the Democrats spied on my campaign. Remember that? They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number 1. Impeachment hoax number 2. The illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-a-Lago, right here. They're lying to the FISA courts, the FBI and DOJ relentlessly pursuing Republicans, the unconstitutional changes to election laws by not getting approvals from state legislators, the millions of votes illegally stuffed into ballot boxes and all caught on government cameras. And just recently, the FBI and DOJ, in collusion with Twitter and Facebook, in order not to say anything bad about the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, which exposes the Biden family as criminals and which, according to the pollsters, would have made a 17-point difference in the election result. And we needed a lot less than that, like about 16.9. It would have been in our favor, not my favor, our favor, because our country is going to hell. Who said Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. It didn't exist. It was Russian disinformation. And that was all confirmed strongly by the FBI, but they all knew that it wasn't Russian disinformation. And so much more. Our elections were like those of a third world country. And now this massive election interference at a scale never seen before in our country. Beginning with the radical left, George Soros-backed prosecutor Alvin Bragg of New York, who campaigned on the fact that he would get President Trump. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. This is the guy campaigning. You want to get President Trump at any cost in this before he knew anything about me, didn't know a thing about me. He was campaigning. As it turns out, virtually everybody that has looked at this case, including rhinos and even hardcore Democrats, say there is no crime and that it should never have been brought. Never have been brought. Everybody. Even people that aren't big fans have said it. They said this is not the right thing to do. It's an insult to our country, as the world is already laughing at us for so many other reasons, like our open borders, our incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we left behind American citizens, $85 billion worth of the best military equipment in the world, lost 13 magnificent young lives, and far too many to mention that are so badly hurt with the loss of arms and legs and facial obliteration. The most embarrassing time in our country's history, in my opinion. Then our give up on energy independence and even energy dominance. We're going to be dominant within 6 months, more than any other nation times 2. We had this all just 3 years ago. Our raging crime statistics, if you look in Democrat-run cities, numbers the likes of which we have never seen before. The open threats by various countries of the use of nuclear weapons, something never mentioned or discussed by outside nations during the Trump administration, and which could very well lead under the Biden administration's leadership to an all-out nuclear World War III can happen. We're not very far away from it, believe it or not. An economy that has been crippled by the biggest inflation we have seen in more than 60 years, and a military that I used to defeat ISIS in 4 weeks. They said it would take 4 years. 4 weeks. To kill al-Baghdadi and Soleimani, that has now gone woke at the top levels by trying to indoctrinate everyone down to the lowest ranking patriot. But now they have really stepped up their efforts by indicting the 45th President of the United States, who received $75 million votes, which is more than any sitting president in the history of our country. And in the wings, they've got a local racist Democrat district attorney in Atlanta who is doing everything in her power to indict me over an absolutely perfect phone call, even more perfect than the one I made with the president of Ukraine. Remember, I kept saying, that's a perfect call. This one was more perfect. Nobody said, sir, you shouldn't say that. Many people on the phone or hung up in disgust because of something I inappropriately said, because nothing was said wrong. In fact, at the end of the call, we agreed to continue our conversation about election fraud, and election fraud specifically in Georgia, at a later time. Many people on the phone, including lots of lawyers, nobody found anything wrong with that perfect call until a book promotion tour many months later. All of a sudden they say, you know, I remember Trump making a call. Let's look at that. This fake case was brought only to interfere with the upcoming 2024 election, and it should be dropped immediately. Then you have a radical left lunatic known as a bomb thrower who is harassing hundreds of my people day after day over the boxes hoax. You know, the boxes hoax, as we call it. Just so everyone knows, I come under what's known as the Presidential Records Act, which was designed and approved by Congress long ago just for this reason. Under the act, I'm supposed to negotiate with NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, which as of this date is a radical left troublemaking organization that red flags the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights as dangerous and triggering. Can you imagine? This is what we have to deal with. But there is no criminality under the Presidential Records Act. That is not what it's all about. We were negotiating in very good faith, proper way, in order to return some or all of the documents that I openly and in very plain sight brought with me to Mar-a-Lago from our beautiful White House, just as virtually every other president has done in the past. When FBI and DOJ officials with NARA were here, I told my lawyer to show them the very secure storage room in which they were locked. The FBI's sole request in writing was, could you please put another lock on the door? We immediately complied. It's a lot different than the Biden situation, isn't it? The next thing I know, we were raided by many gun-toting FBI agents who took whatever they wanted, including my passports and medical records. Everybody was in shock. Nobody had ever heard of such a raid before. We can't even believe it. Who would think that that could happen today? I immediately thought of the Fourth Amendment that protects against unreasonable search and seizure. But they did it anyway because our justice system has become lawless. They're using it now, in addition to everything else, to win elections. Apparently, they're not looking at me through the view of the Non-Criminal Presidential Records Act. They came up with a new one. This is a new one. And they're looking at me through the Espionage Act. Think of that. How does that sound? Of 1917, where the penalty is death. Even though that has absolutely nothing to do with openly taking boxes of documents and mostly clothing and other things to my home, which President Obama has done, the Bushes have done, Jimmy Carter has done, Ronald Reagan has done. Everybody's done. In fact, Hillary Clinton got rid of 33,000 emails, and that was okay. But nobody's done it like Joe Biden. This lunatic special prosecutor named Jack Smith, I wonder what it was prior to a change, who others of his ilk say he is even worse than they are, is only looking at Trump, yet Joe Biden took massive amounts more documents, even removed many boxes to Chinatown. You believe that? Just got $10 million from China. Where did that come from? I guess they were banking on Hunter's expertise and had others stored in unsecured offices in Pennsylvania and strewn all over his garage floor where his now very famous Corvette is also stored. All over the floor, including classified documents. But that's okay. Perhaps most importantly, he has 1,850 boxes in Delaware, which he is refusing to give up. But isn't that real obstruction? That's obstruction. As president, I have the right to declassify documents, and the process is automatic if I take them with me. It's automatic, declassify. Biden was vice president. He had absolutely no right to declassify as vice president. He doesn't come under the Non-Criminal Presidential Records Act. He comes under the very criminal Federal Records Act, unfortunately for him, but it's not going to matter because they don't follow the law, which has very severe penalties. He had classified documents that he took while he was a senator, which is absolutely inexcusable. And other senators, including Democrats, are outraged. But he's not being harassed and hounded like the people who work for me are. In fact, they seem to have forgotten about his documents entirely. So many, thousands and thousands. It's okay with him. They like to say that I'm obstructing, which I'm not, because I was working with NARA very nicely until the raid on my home. But Biden is obstructing by making it impossible to get the 1,850 boxes or explain why many documents were located in Chinatown. Can't explain it. Why were they in Chinatown? I don't know. Lastly, I'm under investigation. This time a civil investigation by another racist in reverse who also campaigned on, I will get Trump. I will get him. This was her campaign. Never ran for office. I will get him. Her name is Letitia James. And she proclaimed while campaigning, quote, I look forward to going into the office of the Attorney General every single day, suing him, and then going home. Just before she knew me. She announced, what is fueling my soul right now is Trump. And that she had her eyes on Trump Tower. Those eyes are focused on Trump Tower. Didn't know the young lady. She even assured her supporters in an election promise that we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass. He's going to know my name personally. And then she claimed that I was an illegitimate president. Think of that. With all we did on energy, with all we did on the military, on taxes, biggest tax cuts in history, biggest regulation cuts in history, right to try, people able to get drugs now that aren't approved. Hopefully you don't have that problem. Letitia James vowed to use every area of the law to, quote, investigate President Trump and his business transactions. Those transactions are going to be investigated, she said. And that of her family and his family, because we're going after his family, and we're going after them hard. This is all before entering office and all before knowing anything at all about me, but she was going to get me. This is why, along with unrelenting crime, so many people and companies are leaving New York. She said that I falsified my financial statements, but in fact, we're proving and will prove that my financial statements were substantially more than we submitted, not less. And in all cases, have a strong disclaimer clause in them, which tells the institutions that may look at that, if they want to, not to rely on the statement. But they've got a problem with their case because, number one, I'm very underleveraged. They can't believe it, all the stuff they read and gave, and have very little debt relative to the value of assets. And importantly, not one bank has lost even $1. She was investigating me to save banks. They have very good lawyers. But they didn't lose $1 with us during this period of time. In fact, the banks we're talking about made almost $200 million off Donald Trump, and they liked me very much. We never missed a payment, never got a default notice, had a great relationship with all of them. I don't need banks. We have a lot of cash. I built a great business with my family, built a fantastic business. I have a son here who's done a great job, and I have another son here who's done a great job. Tiffany. And Ivanka. And Barron will be great someday. He's tall. He is tall, and he's smart. But I have a great family, and they've done a fantastic job, and we appreciate it very much. They've gone through hell. So she's suing me over banks that weren't defrauded, when she should be focused on violent crime that's driving people out of the state. This is a persecution, not an investigation. She's put our family through hell. It's cost hundreds of millions of dollars to defend, but our heads are held very, very high. They want to settle the case, but I want no part of that. So here we are now. It's where we were today, in a city that was so great just 4 or 5 years ago. But now we're there, spent time there today, as you possibly read, with a local failed district attorney charging a former president of the United States for the first time in history on a basis that every single pundit and legal analyst said, there is no case. There's no case. They kept saying, there's no case. Virtually everyone. But it's far worse than that, because he knew there was no case. That's why last week he delayed for a month and then immediately took that back and threw this ridiculous indictment together. Came out today, everybody said, this is not really an indictment. There's nothing here. My lawyers came to me and they said, there's nothing here. They're not even saying what you did. The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information for which he should be prosecuted, or at a minimum, he should resign. And Alvin Bragg's wife confirmed a report that claimed her husband has Trump nailed on felonies. She has since locked down her Twitter account. his chief prosecutor, who represented the Democrats and crooked Hillary Clinton in a firm run by Chuck Schumer's brother, Robert, he quit the firm in order to go to work in the DA office in order to get Trump. Can you imagine that? Hillary Clinton's lawyer, Democrat firm. Ultimately, he quit as chief prosecutor because Bragg didn't think he had a case. Think of that same guy that brought this ridiculous thing today. Yet during his investigation, this prosecutor named Mark Pomerantz wrote and published a book saying all sorts of privileged things and has been very strongly reprimanded. He was reprimanded so strongly. I've never seen anything like it. I've probably the end of it. But what he did was probably very illegal, but he was very, very strongly reprimanded. Even District Attorney Bragg was furious with him. They were having a tremendous fight in the office because of it. But hope is never lost because various prosecutors in the DA's office also quit because they thought President Trump was being treated very unfairly. How about that? Isn't that great? Oh, I love them. I'd like to meet them. I'd like to meet them. The DA's office even had a web page. Meet the team of executives who have done this to President Trump. That was the title. Isn't that nice? They immediately had to take it down. Meanwhile, overall crime in New York was up 30% last year, much more than that the year before, with felony assaults, robberies, and burglaries all up by massive, massive numbers. Not the same place that I know, not the same place that you know. And this is where we are right now. I have a Trump-hating judge with a Trump-hating wife and family whose daughter worked for Kamala Harris and now receives money from the Biden-Harris campaign, and a lot of it. We recently had another trial, and the same judge told the fine man who worked for me for many, many years that if you admit your guilt, you will be in jail for 90 days. But if you don't, if we go through a trial and you're found guilty, you're going away for 10 years and maybe longer, which for a 75-year-old man with a great family really means life. What the prosecutors and judge did to that man, I will never forget, because it's right out of the old Soviet Union. That's where we are. They said, you say anything about Trump, meaning that's bad, and you won't even have to serve the 90 days. You'll walk free. And they say that to many of my employees. We have this Jack Smith lunatic threatening people every single day through his representatives. They're threatening jail terms. But talk about Trump and you'll go free. This is where we are as a nation. Who would have thought they can't beat us at the ballot box, so they try and beat us through the law. That's the country in which we live, however, right now. The USA is a mess. Our economy is crashing. Inflation is out of control. Russia has joined with China. Can you believe that? Saudi Arabia has joined with Iran. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have formed together as a menacing and destructive coalition. Would have never happened if I were your president. Would never have happened. Nor would Russia attacking Ukraine have happened. All of those lives would be saved. All of those beautiful cities.
We're going to pull away from Donald Trump since he's entered what is by now sort of a routine campaign speech. We've heard the news really from the top of this event, but we'll keep monitoring it and bring you anything else that Donald Trump says of news value. The former president used this moment in the spotlight to repeat lies about the 2020 election. He listed his grievances and made exaggerated and false claims about his enemies, both his political enemies and the men and women who are doing their legal job. With no evidence, he called the Manhattan District Attorney a criminal. This is Trump speaking at Mar-a-Lago after being arraigned in Manhattan court this afternoon on 34 felony counts. I have with me James Hohman, opinions columnist, Rhonda Colvin, senior Capitol Hill reporter, and Rosalind Helderman, political enterprise and investigations reporter. James, let's just go through the focus that Trump did give to the charges he is facing in Manhattan.
He said there was nothing to them. He is basically running the Trump playbook that he's used for 50 years, going back to the advice that Roy Cohn gave him when he was under Justice Department investigation in the early 1970s, which was to counterpunch. A few minutes ago, we heard the former president say the real criminal is the district attorney. He should be prosecuted. That is exactly what Trump always does, the kind of the whataboutism. What about Hunter Biden? What about Hillary Clinton? What about this? What about that? And the deflection, the counterpunching. This is the response that we've seen from Donald Trump every time that he's felt his back has been up against the wall for 5 decades now.
I want to just mention some logistics there. We were losing the audio because the main pool feed was down at one point. This is just how live broadcast works. We were able to get it back, though, and we were able to hear him talk, Rhonda, about some campaign stuff. You know, he's criticizing the Biden administration. Oh, Donald Trump just wrapped up. That's in Mar-a-Lago. Hearing the cheers and the support he wanted, I think, to hear, Rhonda, at the end of this historic and just really precedent-setting day where he was arraigned. He had to go into court. He had to go through that process that is totally out of his control. Right, he had to appear before a judge, and he had to hear that he is charged with 34 felony counts. So, you know, I was talking about how he went through some of the campaign issues and stuff, but then he got back to these legal questions. What stood out to you?
Well, you know, this wasn't altogether surprising because if you followed his response on Thursday, actually the top of his speech was almost verbatim what he put on Truth Social. He is sort of weaving in this as a campaign moment for him. It's likely that we might see that continue as he continues to campaign. I will say one thing that stood out to me is the length of time he spent on the classified documents grand jury. He called Jack Smith twice a lunatic. He also said that no one was looking into Biden and the classified documents, and that is untrue.
Not true.
Right. Robert Hur is the special counsel that has been assigned to look into the Biden classified documents issue stemming from his time as vice president. So that again is one of those moments where we've often seen with Trump where it is that whataboutism. It is, well, what about these guys over here? What about these people over here? I will say he did, and he's done this before in recent days, but he went after Alvin Bragg, but he also talked about his wife. He also brought up his daughter as well. And this is something that the judge today, for folks who are following our coverage earlier today, the judge did ask Trump to stand down from this rhetoric about going after judges on social media. That was a big concern. That was something that reporters outside of the courthouse today asked one of Trump's attorneys about. Will he dial back? Will the lawyers be able to get him to dial back on social media? You know, taking from what we just heard, he does not seem like he is dialing back at all. This was sort of like a stream of consciousness of, you know, a list of grievances that we have heard before.
I want to get Rosalind Haldeman in the conversation, but first, Rhonda, you mentioned that he talked about Alvin Bragg's wife and daughter. Can you just elucidate a little bit? He was going after them, criticizing them sort of politically, but these are family members. What was he saying, and what's the
he's
substance
been saying
of this?
That, you know, she is a Trump hater.
His wife is.
His wife, yes. Alvin Bragg's wife is. That his daughter also works for Vice President Kamala Harris. These are things that, again, Trump is bringing in other people into what should be a moment, I guess, for him to discuss his innocence if he wanted to. He had a platform to talk about today, talk about the things that are standing against him. Instead, he's certainly in attack mode from what we're seeing.
You know, and so it's important to note, James, that one of his sons was tweeting at it, you know, about Alvin Bragg's daughter, which is just of concern because it then puts the spotlight on someone who's not at all involved in this. And
yeah,
is,
both
you know,
Eric and Don Jr. Tweeted
Listen.
a picture of the daughter.
Let's bring in Roz to talk more about what she heard tonight. Roz, you know, let's talk about he did talk a lot about the investigations, the impeachments, which he's called a hoax. As Rhonda very significantly pointed out, he spent a lot of time talking about some of the other investigations and the quote-unquote perfect phone call that he says he made to Georgia. What stood out to you?
Yeah, I was actually struck by the same thing that Rhonda just mentioned, the amount of time he spent on the classified document case. You know, a number of people around Donald Trump, you know, the case against him right now has to be considered the most threatening one, the one in New York, because it's the only one that has actually resulted in criminal charges. That having been said, a number of people around him are especially concerned about the classified document case. You know, the Washington Post, our colleagues just reported over the weekend that Special Counsel Jack Smith has gathered significant new evidence of possible obstruction by Donald Trump in that case. And the amount of time he really spent on that, you know, Donald Trump's psychology is not typically hard to figure out. And I think you can look at it sort of the more time he spent on it, the more that's the case that might be most on his mind, despite the fact that he spent, you know, all of today going to New York to deal with the Alvin Bragg case.
Roz, does Donald Trump put himself in legal jeopardy if he talks about these other investigations, if he riffs on them, if he makes allegations like that, you know, the DA in Atlanta is racist in his words? You know, what does that do for his legal situation? Does it have any bearing?
Yeah, the more he gets into the facts of those cases, the more he could create additional legal problems for himself by publicly claiming things that are not true in ways that could be helpful to the prosecutors. Some of that heated rhetoric, I'm not sure it really changes his legal position. Certainly it's going to anger prosecutors and indeed anger judges as he gets into court processes. I mean, I think that it was Rhonda who mentioned also that this was a subject of conversation in the arraignment this afternoon. You know, the judge said that he wants to respect Donald Trump's First Amendment rights, but did ask him, and of course when a judge does it, they're going beyond asking, they're really ordering him to not do anything that could incite violence or undermine the rule of law. And so, you know, I'm sure that Alvin Bragg and his team were watching that performance this evening very closely. And, you know, if they heard anything tonight or they see anything on social media in coming days or at future events that they believe could spark violence or affect their jury pool, they're going to be back in court complaining about it.
So, Roz, if you are someone who is pursuing one of these legal paths, while some of us, myself included, might get distracted or interested in some of the rhetoric, what the legal minds would be listening for is how he describes the phone call with Georgia, how many people were on the call, what people said to him or didn't say to him. So you're listening for the context, the information, these nuggets that he's claiming that then could be looked into, could be dug into, really, everything from the documents case to the Georgia case.
Sure, and you know, when he says things publicly that are not true, it allows prosecutors to delve into whether they can figure out why he's doing that and whether he might be publicly lying because he has a consciousness of guilt. He in fact, despite saying otherwise publicly, knows what he did was wrong and he's lying about it. I'm not sure we necessarily heard anything that would go in that direction, although we certainly did hear a lot of untruths. For instance, you mentioned the so-called perfect call in Georgia that he claimed no one complained about until ages afterwards when they were writing books. That's funny. I think all of us here at the Washington Post certainly remember well that, in fact, the Washington Post broke the news of that call on the day that it happened, and plenty of people complained the very second it became public. And in fact, if memory holds, I believe that there are text messages showing that some of the folks involved with the call were exchanging unhappy text messages even while it was going on. And so it's just not true that no one complained or thought it was bad for a long time.
James, Trump went on a riff about people being encouraged to essentially flip on him, right? And he seemed to be talking about Alan Weisselberg at some point. He was talking about a 75-year-old and, you know, how this is, you know, essentially a prison sentence of life if you're sentenced to 10 years. Let's talk about who Weisselberg is and why he might be on Trump's mind.
So he was the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, who was successfully prosecuted by the same Manhattan District Attorney who today charged Trump. The Trump Organization was found guilty in December, and Alvin Bragg has said publicly that that was something that really emboldened him to go after Trump on this case that had been considered sort of a zombie case. Clearly, it's top of mind that Trump, he talked about how people who work for me are being harassed, and he was talking about that in the context of what he called the boxes hoax, which is the documents, and the basically saying Jack Smith and other federal attorneys are going to his staff and trying to get them to flip against him. That clearly is very top of mind for him. I was really struck in that vein how much Trump has sort of co-opted the language of his critics, and we saw that during this 25-minute speech. He was talking about how the prosecution of him is election interference, that they're trying to interfere with the 2024 election, which is reminiscent of people saying he was, the Russians were interfering in the 2016 election. And then when it came to the boxes, he said, he made some baseless claims about Joe Biden and 1,850 boxes in Delaware. He's referring to the archives from when Joe Biden was a senator there at the University of Delaware. Nothing nefarious about that, but he said, "Isn't that obstruction? That's obstruction." It's that Trump playbook of trying to use the language, whether it's fake news or whatever, and to turn it against and weaponize it against whoever is criticizing him.
To be clear, I just want to point out Alan Weisselberg was sentenced to 5 months in jail. He's not in the general population. He's in really like a special unit that's designed for people who are essentially elderly or infirm. So this is on his mind, though, Rhonda.
It is on his mind. And again, this was sort of that list of grievances that we've heard. We've heard him talk about the Alan Weisselberg situation being a death sentence because he's in his 70s. He has certainly said that before in his comments about the presiding judge over this case, Juan Marchand, who is going to be presiding over this DA Brock case in New York. Also very interesting, he talked about how other presidents have gone through this classified document thing and taken boxes of documents in their clothes home, I believe he said. He even went back to Jimmy Carter, and we know that the DOJ and these presidents' office have said they did not have classified documents. So again, he's bringing other names and people into a situation that he's facing, and that is certainly dangerous misinformation because supporters can believe it. He's saying it, and they can believe it if they aren't following the facts.
Yeah, Rhonda brings up a good point. If you believe Trump, if you believe that everything he says is true, and there were many things he said tonight that are not true, you could be very alarmed. Because at one point he seemed to talk about that he could face like the death penalty, right? Did you catch that, Roz?
I did catch that moment. And that was really striking. I mean, he was referring to one of the statutes that the Justice Department has said it is investigating in the Mar-a-Lago case that relates to the improper handling of classified material. Let's be clear, even if Donald Trump is charged and convicted with that crime, he is not going to be sentenced to death. And I think you're right. He's obviously throwing out, he's trying to rev up his supporters and is trying to be as alarming as he can in his effort to paint himself as some kind of victim.
And Roz, where does that dialogue go from here? We know that Trump's been fundraising off of this. Where does this relationship that Trump has with his supporters go in the coming days and weeks as he runs for re-election?
Right. I mean, we know, as you said, there has been fundraising, and his team has claimed it has been a very successful fundraising technique for him. I think they claimed they had raised $8 million since the indictment as of yesterday. I read some reporting today that perhaps he was accompanied today by some kind of videographer to film him for campaign ads. They are talking a big game that this is going to be good for him politically. Obviously, none of us know whether this is going to be good for him politically. This has never happened before. Certainly there are a lot of Republicans in the primary setting who in focus groups and in other places have indicated that they are interested in starting to talk more about the future. The speech we heard from Donald Trump tonight was not about the future. It was about his personal grievances going all the way back to, the Bob Mueller investigation. So it's a little hard to know how this will ultimately affect him politically. I would say also that his aides were trying to say for days now that he was sort of relishing today, this moment when, every television camera for a full 24 hours would be on him constantly, and he could show how strong and defiant he was. I have to say, when we saw those images of him walking into the courthouse and then walking through the hallways of the courtroom, and then those still photos of him sitting in the courtroom, he did not exactly look like a happy man.
And James, you've seen Donald Trump speak so many times. What would you say about his energy level tonight and sort of how he was sticking to the script versus sort of, getting revved up by the crowd.
As unhinged as parts of that speech seemed,
From reality.
This was teleprompter Trump. He was reading off of a teleprompter. This was, as Rhonda noted earlier, the first part of the speech very much replicated a post he had put on his social media platform earlier today. He didn't use the term witch hunt to describe the investigation. So I think it was, it was more subdued than I expected. We heard Ashley Parker just beforehand talking about how the Mar-a-Lago vibe is different than the Friday night campaign rally vibe in a place like Waco, Texas. Ultimately, when he goes through all these different people that he says are persecuting him, from Letitia James and Alvin Bragg in New York to Fannie Willis in Georgia to Jack Smith, it reminds you of the staggering number of legal probes that are ongoing into him. He's obviously trying to paint that all together and group them into some big attack on him and his supporters. But it really is just startling when you hear Trump talk about this wide range, real breadth of criminal jeopardy that he could find himself in the coming weeks and months.
So Donald Trump has tried to control the narrative tonight, but let's get back to the really big news of the day, which is the indictment. Roz, talk to us about the significance of the indictment, the charges that have been brought against him, the first time in American history that we see a former president charged with crimes like this. What is the most important element of this indictment for you?
Yeah, it's a lot of counts. It's 34 felonies. In some ways, it's sort of simply charged. All the felonies are the same charge. It's falsifying business records, and they all relate to how the payments to Michael Cohen were structured to reimburse him when he was getting reimbursed in 2017 for the payoff he had made to Stormy Daniels prior to the 2016 election to buy her Silence, the adult film actress. And so what's kind of interesting is that the charges themselves are sort of narrow, but in New York State, falsifying business records is a misdemeanor. It is only a felony if you can show that it was done in the process of committing or hiding another crime. And so the other crime that Alvin Bragg said that Donald Trump committed was election law violations. And so he has laid out this in a separate document, a statement of facts, this sort of sweeping narrative of how Donald Trump interfered with and undermined the 2016 presidential election by systematically looking for bad news stories and and paying to have them buried before people voted. So it's kind of an unusual way to structure this. I think everything about this case is unprecedented, but the notion of a falsified business record to hide campaign finance violations, election law violations, both state and federal, is a little unusual. And some legal experts we talked to today wondered if that's going to hold up in front of a judge and ultimately hold up in front of a jury.
Roz, what are the implications, or are there implications, frankly, seeing this case move forward? What are the implications on the other investigations that are going on into Donald Trump as other DAs, as other potential prosecutors look at this case? Does it affect their calculations, their strategy?
So technically, no. Of course, all these cases are separate, with the slight exception that there's a federal January 6th investigation that has some overlap with the Fulton County investigation. But otherwise, these are separate prosecutors, separate investigators, and they don't have to be influenced by one another. If this case starts to proceed and have trouble, I suppose it could give other prosecutors pause to make sure that they won't have any similar problems. On the other hand, there may be sort of a sense that someone has taken the plunge, right? It's hard to go first and, issue the first criminal charges ever against a sitting or a former president. Maybe there's some sense that it's a bit easier for the next prosecutor, provided, of course, they feel they have the evidence to make the case.
Thanks so much, Roz Helderman. Really appreciate it. Rhonda, this is not going to move fast.
No.
Yeah, and you know, I think that I don't know if there's an expectation that it would move fast, but this may feel extra slow, especially to people who aren't always covering the cycle of courts, like our colleague Shayna in New York, who's very familiar with what happens there. This is not an episode of Law & Order where it's all wrapped up in a neat 59-minute package, right? So talk to us about the timeline of this.
Well, what we know is that it will likely start to play out a trial situation in December or January. So there's months now, months of lapse between today's events and what could ultimately be a trial. That could last months, it could even last a year. I know in some reporting, when you look at standard cases like this, they do go on for months or a year. So this is a long time. This is going to overlap or at least run parallel to any campaigning that he is doing, as well as any of the other people running against him. This is something that now that it's been injected into the campaign for 2024, that all of his rivals are likely going to try to use against him or try to figure out how to calculate statements. We've already seen that so far, but now that there is an indictment that's been unsealed, we know charges, you're probably going to see how this is rolled into Donald Trump's campaigning as well as some of the other 24 candidates.
Yeah, we saw prosecutors say they'd like to move ahead with everything next January, which is really sort of incredible to us. And then Trump's team was pushing for the spring, James, a year from now.
A year from now. It's hard to believe. I mean, the time does fly in legal terms. That actually is pretty quick for a trial of this nature with these kinds of felony charges.
I mean, one thing to point out is that those are very different timelines, though, in terms of the presidential campaign season.
Exactly. Iowa will have the Republican caucuses in January. The Republican convention is supposed to be next July in Milwaukee. Now there's going to be a discovery process where the prosecution in the next 2 months is going to have to share all of the information that they've accumulated as part of the investigation with the defense team. The Trump team is going to have the chance to make motions to dismiss, knock down some of these charges, maybe convince a judge or an appellate court that these really should be misdemeanors instead of a felony, which would mean no jail time. So all of that will play out, and there could be developments. One of the things I was struck by actually was how much he focused on Letitia James, who is different. That's the state New York Attorney General, not Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney who came after him. And she's suing the Trump Organization for misstating the value and net worth of various things. And he said, "I want no part in settling." It's funny because it reminded me of almost exactly what he said over and over again in 2016 when he said he didn't do anything wrong on Trump University, would never settle. Right after the election, he settled. The challenge for Trump, because he's running for president a third time, put aside jail time, anything like that, he really cannot settle these cases. He can't settle with Alvin Bragg on the 34 charges. He can't really settle anything with Fani Willis or Jack Smith. So that is off the table for him, and I think, saw him politically. You saw him exuding that and sort of acknowledging that reality as he talked tonight.
Rhonda, final thoughts from you as we wrap up this evening.
I've been thinking about all of these investigations. If you look at them, even back to the Robert Mueller case and the investigation into the 2016 election, most of Trump's cases involve him wanting to be president and the election. And even the 2 impeachments had to do with him wanting to be reelected. The case in Fulton County, that has to do with election interference. The only outlier is probably the classified documents issue. And one of the things I'm thinking is, he's been able to bypass a lot of things, a lot of investigations so far. But how is the electorate going to take this moving forward for this coming election? I remember talking to voters before the midterm election, both Republicans and Democrats. Both of them from different states told me that they were tired of the name calling. They were tired of the finger pointing. So have we reached a point where this particular case or some of the other ones coming down the pipe will have some sort of effect where people will just be showing their fatigue and saying, you know what, it's time for us to look for a new candidate?
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's all for us tonight. Thank you for joining us as we witness the first draft of history today. Former President Donald Trump being indicted and charged with felony counts. We will continue to cover this story here at the Washington Post. A special thanks to Rhonda Colvin, James Homan, our reporters in the field, and our team in the control room. I'm Libby Casey. Have a good night.
The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.